Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask an Architect. I'm Julia Andor, your National Vice President, and I'm here today speaking with Jenna Audition. So, Jenna, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Yes, I'm so excited. AIAS holds a special place in my heart. So I'm excited to speak with you and to meet with you again. It's really great to see you and all that you've been doing for AIAS.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, maybe we could get started by chatting a little bit about who you are and how you got into the field. If you could just give us a little bit of context, that would be awesome.
Sure. So architecture was brand new to me. It was not something that I knew or was exposed to. Um, and actually found myself as a child, and I didn't realize this until I dug it up later in my parents' house, that I was drawing floor plans and I was piecing furniture collages together. And it wasn't until eighth grade when I had a math assignment to draw your dream house. And our math teacher had us actually calculate the square footage of that home. And I just completely fell in love with that task. I don't know what it was about it that I found so interesting, but I think it's just like spatial thinking, and it was math in a different way. And it was thanks to my eighth grade math teacher, Mrs. Hogenkamp, who said, when you go off to high school, if your high school offers drafting courses or architectural courses, you should look into those. So that's what I did. I took some drafting courses in high school. Um, there's a caveat that drafting courses in high school are very different from majoring in architecture in college, but it was at least a little bit of exposure to what this profession was, and just confirming that I did enjoy it after getting a little bit more invested in it and doing some more work in it as I got a little bit older in high school.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I guess I kind of am curious about how that kind of goes back and forth with kind of your interest in civics and leadership, and you're very involved in the AIA. So I was just curious kind of how you remedy those two things. How do you think they work together? Those two interests of kind of technical work and also leadership.
Yeah, this may be a longer answer, so bear with me. Um, but I think it all started with how involved I was with student government and student council. So I was always involved with student council since about the fifth grade. Some students are interested in sports or theater or really diving into their academics, but student government was really where I found my passion and a lot of excitement in planning events and doing things for like a larger student body. And then so that translated when I got to high school as well. And we had actually five student councils at my high school. We had one that was for the entire school. And it was an actual course that I took and completely loved it as well. So it was pairing that with my love of geometry and starting to learn that these things can go together. But I have to say that eventually going to Temple University for my architectural education is what ignited that understanding that architecture was a civic pursuit. And I think it definitely ties into Temple as a university as overall too, and like what their general mission is. Being in North Philadelphia definitely sets the stage for thinking about the community in which you're situated, the community in which you're going to propose a project. And I didn't know going into Temple University at the time how much that was going to be integrated into our curriculum. But anytime we had a project, it was almost always situated in Philadelphia. So we as the students would bike together or take the subway, but mostly biked together to that site visit. And actually saw like, okay, who's the neighbor? Who's down the street? Who's the community organizer, whether it's grassroots or more formal? And that tying together and having teachers that constantly push that during your desk grits as well made me realize how you could not pull apart architecture and politics. And that was just that much more evident once I got to New York and started my first job right after college. And being situated in New York City, which has such a robust political presence, I realized, okay, AA New York has their advocacy group and they're doing lobby days up in Albany. And I started getting involved with those and realizing how exciting it was to speak about architecture to people who don't understand it, but make laws about it. And it was like, you know what, if I can't do this in my day job, like actually affect policy in such a direct way, at least we as architects have some ability to express that knowledge and be an expert witness, or speak to what we truly know, whether it's housing, coastal resiliency, I mean, all these major topics that we deal with all the time, and using that knowledge to inform local officials. So all that led to, and I don't know if you want me to get into the civic leadership program, but this might be a good opportunity. So, you know, I was, let's see, 2 years out of school, and this program popped up at the AIA chapter. And I was like, what is this civic leadership program? I've never heard of this. But I read their mission. I was like, this is incredible. This is what I've been looking for. It was, let's put politics and architecture in the same conversation because they can't be pulled apart, as I was saying. And it just completely changed my network in New York. It ultimately led me to learning more about the Department of Design and Construction, which is where I am working now. And ultimately, the Civic Leadership Program's goal is to think about architects in political office. That doesn't mean abandoning being an architect, but taking the skills that you have, which include consensus building, public speaking, selling an idea, like all these skills that we already have to do as being an architect are so well poised for office. And then just imbuing that people that want to see a better world. I mean, it's like the perfect recipe. So that's the mission of the Civic Leadership Program. I applied to its first inaugural year in 2017, and I was one of the 10 of that first cohort. And it's just been rolling ever since. So the Civic Leadership Program is now in its 7th year. I've been involved here or there over the past 7 years. And then just this past March, a staff member, Kavitha, who was very involved in shepherding the Civic Leadership Program as like a liaison between the CLP and the local chapter, she decided she needed to step away from it, take a breath. And so there was this vacancy in this role. And so I ended up stepping up. So now being on that side of the Civic Leadership Program is very interesting. And I'm excited to continue my involvement with it because I do feel so strongly about its mission. And it's just exciting to see applicants every year still applying. There's still very much an interest in this topic in the profession, which is great. And I hope that that never dwindles. So yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I
Long
know
story short, you can't pull architecture and politics apart. All that
absolutely.
to say.
Yeah, I think so many students are sharing similar sentiments now that they're really interested in kind of making a difference in the world and participating in architecture that kind of does good. So I'm curious, what do you think, in keeping all of this in mind, are the most important qualities that an architect should have, or what skills should students interested in following a similar path focus on?
I think there's always a difficult balance with architecture and the craft, spending time in studio, plugging in with your headphones in and entering that creative space that you could get lost in forever. And then also stepping out of studio. I'm speaking specifically to students, but maybe also emerging professionals, like stepping out of studio and stepping out of the office and getting involved with something. And then meeting people who can inform your architectural practice. And that doesn't mean networking with just other architects. On the contrary, sometimes I found it really frustrating that in architecture school, we were always just talking to each other. Meanwhile, other students have felt like in the business school or in a teaching school, like had this time to potentially also join other clubs or extracurriculars and meet other students that they would have never met in the classroom. And so I wish I saw more of that for architects. Find a way to align your passions, because there's no way your only passion is architecture. Like there's something else that you have to be interested in or you'll go totally nuts. And so for me, that is politics in that regard, without becoming a politician, because those are very different things. So I think the advice that I would have is, whatever your other passion is, that doesn't mean it has to be a one-to-one tie into your architectural work, but use it as an outlet to get out of studio and then meet with other people who can tell you maybe more than you know about architecture. They may not have the vocabulary that we use, but people know their space. People know how they need their buildings and parks and public spaces to work for them. So we just have to take that and translate it into the built environment.
So yeah, I feel like you're speaking directly to me because I have a lot of the same interests, and I'm kind of like hanging on to every word that you're saying. But for me, for example, this kind of way to get out of the studio has always been the AIS. And it's also that thing right now that's kind of balancing me between leadership and architecture. I know you were involved in the AIS in your time at Temple, so I was just wondering kind of what that's done for your architecture journey, or if there's any kind of insights you want to share.
Yes, I will preach at the hilltops about the AIS. I absolutely loved it. It just, like you said, it's an opportunity for some leadership and then also an opportunity to meet other architecture students all over the country at the different conferences. I think like you, I ran for Northeast Squad, but I believe that you won and I did not. But that was such a good experience, even just running for Northeast Squad. Um, in Chicago, I think in 2014 or 2013 it was. That whole experience was okay. Here's a student body, student governance that I was looking for and kind of left behind in high school at the college level. And the reason why I still speak so highly of AIS is because it's like the AIA, but on steroids. Like the AIA can get very caught up in being professional. This is a networking, this is professional development, and all those things are wonderful. But there's something about the AIS that's so passionate. And I think there's something nice about still being a student with rose-colored glasses on. And then you just put all these students together and you think that the sky's the limit. And I think it's so wonderful to tap into that energy. It keeps you going. My studio desk at Temple was always filled with half my project, and the other half was flyers, brochures, boxes from AAS. Like it was never, yeah, I was always fighting for space on my desk to make both of them work. Whether my professors like that or not, I don't know, but I made it work and I figured it out. Um, but I just think AIS is something that also continues with you even after you graduate. I still keep in touch with a lot of people I met through AIS, um, and attribute a lot of my feeling like I belong somewhere to AIS. Sometimes architecture studios, there's little groups. You have the skateboarders, or you have the coffee junkies, the musicians, and sometimes I felt like I didn't really know where I belonged in those subgroups. And then it was meeting other students through AAS. I was like, oh, okay, this is the other people that I kind of jive with. They're just sprinkled throughout the country. So it's nice to hold on to that feeling.
Yeah, I think you're kind of describing the sense of community that we talk about so much within the AIS. And it's something that at least I'm always looking to bring out into the profession even more. So I'm curious kind of how you think architects can engage with communities and ensure that kind of their spaces align with the needs and aspirations of the communities that they're building in. You touched on it a little bit about your time in Philly and your site visits, but I'm just curious how you feel like that kind of sense of togetherness that we all feel at the AIS or at the AIA can kind of bring itself into your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes when you're on a project with your firm or wherever it is that you're working, you can only do so much. Your fee only goes so far. Your time, you can only squeeze so much in a day or into that project. And so there are unfortunately just practical limitations. Um, so what's nice about collating with others through AIA or AAS is that there's strength in numbers. And so, Freedom by Design is an excellent program within the AAS. A good friend of mine, Megan, who I'm still very close with, she spearheaded our Freedom by Design group at Temple University and kind of like gave it a new life and ended up doing a project and building a ramp for a family in need in the local Philadelphia suburban area. And then she ended up going into construction. And it was like such a good eye-opening, I think, experience for her as well. And I find this a lot with AIS students, or the ones that are involved with AIS, is that sometimes they go to the alternate career paths too. And AIS, I think, partially helped with that because it was an opportunity to see what others were doing. And so plugging into a community you can do, by yourself, but that's very hard. So when you have AIA or AIS and they have these volunteer opportunities, or they already have relationships built with nonprofits, um, like I was saying earlier, also advocacy and lobby days, those relationships are already built with a structure like the AIA or AIS. So just tap into it. The strength in numbers, I think you'll go much farther. Your efforts may feel like they're going much farther than if you were to try to do it by yourself. But that doesn't mean also that you can't volunteer somewhere specific to you, like an animal shelter, because that's what your interests are. And then while you're there, you can give them some quick feedback about how they could better lay out their space. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any projects maybe that you've worked on or that you're working on that you feel super passionately about, or that you feel like are following kind of these discussions that we've been talking about?
sure. I think, and what I want to focus on for this too is not so much an alternate career path. Like I'm still an architect. I still consider myself an architect with a capital A. I have my license. I practiced in a small firm and a large firm for about 7 years before I made the jump to the public sector. And so my projects look very different now than they used to. I no longer work on construction sets, and I no longer actually see a project get built. Um, but that's because I'm in front end planning for the Department of Design and Construction. And so I guess what I'm really excited about is when I was in school and we were given briefs, or even at the beginning of my professional experience, while being 1, 2 years out of school, and saying, well, who created the budget for this project and the scope? And why does it feel like we can't do what we want to do within these parameters that were just handed to us? I always found that really, really, really annoying. Like I wanted to contribute to that conversation. And I was so elated to find front end planning. I'm still really excited about the work that I do because it's now being that person. I didn't know that that position existed for an architect. So what we do, and to me, every project is great, which is why I'm talking about it in broad terms. Um, we receive a request for a potential project from one of our sponsor agencies. There's 28 or 26 agencies in New York City that offer services to the city of New York. And a good example being Brooklyn Public Library. And they come to us and say, we want to do this project. This is how much money we have, and this is the scope we think we can do. And what we do in front end planning is we do a full assessment of that. We write up the scope, we go to the building, we check it out and see, well, do we need to include additional scope at this time? What's the roof look like when we're only talking about the HVAC? And so we do a full assessment of what's needed at that time. And then we also do a cost estimate. How much money is actually needed to make this project move forward and be successful? So that's what's really exciting, is to be on the front end of the project, and kind of set the stage for what that project will look like once it's executed and enters design, once it leaves front end planning.
Yeah, that sounds great. Do you have any kind of wisdom or advice or thoughts for students, emerging professionals, or anyone that's looking to get into the public sector of architecture?
Sure. The advice that I would have, actually, and this may not be what you might expect, but I would start on the private sector. I would begin in a firm, small, big, maybe try both, see how you like it, and just see a project actually get built. That experience of seeing construction is so important and will only make you that much better once you enter the public sector. I think public sector projects by nature take a little bit longer, and architectural projects already take a long time. So there is no such thing as instant gratification in this profession. But if you're interested in the public sector, you can start to apply to architecture firms that do public sector work and at least see a project from that end. Be on the other side of the table. Be the designer for that project, be the construction administration PM for that project, and see it all the way through. because I think what may happen is once you go to the public sector, perhaps you may take a project management role or another role. You may not get to be as in the weeds in that regard. And you know what? I could be limiting myself in saying that just because of the role that I'm in, but I do think that you'll be a better project manager and you'll better serve the public sector having that experience of actually seeing a project drawn by you and then built and seeing how your drawings come to fruition in construction. So start there. Start with firms that do public work. See if you still like it. Talk to the project manager that you're working with and say, hey, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And then if you think you want to make the leap, make the leap. And you can always go back. You can always jump back and forth too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So do you have any thoughts about like how to assess the kind of work that firms do, or like something that I hear a lot from students is that they do want to feel like the work they do is meaningful and has positive impacts on their communities. So do you have any thoughts or ideas about kind of that process and how to try and keep the balance of positive impact on communities and working at a maybe public or private firm?
Sure. I think there's a siren going by. I don't know if you can hear it. I think the balance is also expanding your definition of what an impact to a community could mean too. Sometimes not every firm has these award-winning public space improvement projects of a lifetime. Firms have to do a lot of work to keep the doors open, and I think being empathetic of that, especially towards firm owners that want to just do a good job and at the end of the day practice good architecture, realizing that that doesn't necessarily mean that every project can be that project, but maybe, like I was saying, expanding what it means to impact a community too, because sometimes I've done work for New York University or Columbia University at the firm that I was at, and that doesn't mean that I felt like I wasn't impacting the community. Here I was a few years out of school working on spaces for students, and I was like, wow, I was just in their shoes. I know what it's like to have a library where the light above you is glaring such a hollow, harsh blue. Let's make sure that we get this light spec correct. So there's like little ways in remembering that what you're doing is going to make a positive impact. And then eventually you work your way towards those really meaningful projects that you look back on and say, wow, I can't believe I worked on that. So it takes time. You may not get put on that project right after you graduate, but they'll come. I promise you that they'll come. If you just keep working hard and just keep learning, those projects need really attentive, really dedicated team members. So if you just show that that's who you are, and ask to be put on that project, you'll be okay. And it's hard to seek out specific firms that do that work. I mean, those firms are often sometimes the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most sought out or sought after firms. So the employment pool may be a little bit tighter. But like I said, you can make an impact in all the projects that you do too.
Yeah, that seems like one specific way you shared that your experiences kind of impact your work. Is there anything else maybe that stands out to you about how you and your experience kind of moving through the world has impacted a project, or anything really that you do?
What do you mean by that? So I
I
want to make
guess
sure I'm
how
answering
you
your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you were referencing how your time as a student kind of informs now your lighting specs. Does um, anything else about you or your experiences kind of impact the way that you do your work or you design for others?
I think, by nature, there's a couple different things, and I can't help but ignore our newfound awareness of public health, especially coming out of a global pandemic. Space has become such a topic of conversation. How much space between you and the person next to you is something that I don't remember anyone ever talking about before COVID. Or at least not in daily conversation, right? Um, Having gone through that while staying in New York City, is definitely impactful on all of the work that we do, because I think it's just a shared trauma across cities in particular, where, there is no outdoor space to go. You were in your small apartment, or you were skirting around people in the really tight supermarket, or, you know, should I take the subway? Should I not take the subway? All those decisions, I think, have impacted what we do now. And when we look at, and this is some of the work that DDC does, um, recreation centers, cooling centers, these places that are places of emergency that people can go to and feel like they have space to be by themselves, or at least not be so close to the person next to them without them sneezing on them. I don't know, whatever your comfort level may be. So that definitely takes into account, like, the physical space now. Yes, there are code minimums that dictate how much space to give per person based on the occupancy. We can get very technical about that. But then there's also translating that code to what that feels like in reality. If you have to take a hula hoop and stand in the middle of it to get a sense of personal space when you're drawing and understand that translation of scale, that's, like, I think, a really good practice too as an architect. And that's something I always try to keep in mind. Like, when you're at your desk at a firm and you're drawing something that's 18 inches wide, what does that feel like? Take your measuring tape, pull out 18 inches and say, oh, okay, that's the distance between here and there. And what does that feel like in reality? Get it off the paper and into the actual space that you're building in. And, I think we're all human, and we seem to be forgetting that. The level of aggression and impatience, it's like skyrocketing. Everyone just wants to, like, get in and get out of that coffee shop, or get in and get out of the library. So it's kind of changing architecture. Where are the exits in relation to that? Going beyond code minimums and thinking, how can we alleviate crowd congestion? How can we make sure that everyone's not just standing in the same place waiting to be queued into the doctor's office, which is already a very potentially uncomfortable experience. So just remember that you, as an architect, and my husband always says this, it's kind of like being an actor. When actors play a certain role or character in a movie, they learn all about it. They learn what it's like to be a zookeeper. They learn what it's like to be a orchestra conductor. And I think architects do the same thing by interviewing and learning about the clients that we're working for. We're like, oh, I kind of feel like I'm an orchestra conductor, and I'm learning what spatial requirements they need to best do their work. So with every new project, you also put on a new hat of a different character, and really have to soak into that to build the best project for them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I do have one question that's a personal question of mine. It's not from our list.
That's okay.
Are there any books that you've read that have impacted you that you might want to recommend to me or to students or to anybody in the profession?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to be honest. No, I do not read nearly as much as I should. Everyone tells me that I should read The Power Broker, which I haven't read yet, so I can forward that along and recommend that. Um, I I tend to not read books about our profession. When I read, I want to unplug, and so I don't seek out books about our profession. That's probably my own fault. I should probably do that more, but and so my husband's
It doesn't
also an
have to be a book
architect,
about
and he has a
architecture.
full bookcase on architecture books, and I should open them more. Um, doesn't have to be about architecture.
Yeah.
I think what sometimes I find more interesting than a book is, there's so many blogs out now. Madame Architect is a great one that Julia Gamelina does. Those are the kinds of things that I dive into to read. And I just enjoy seeing what other people are doing today. It's not yet published in a book, but it's something that they're working on, or it's someone that I wish I had known about earlier as they become a role model to me, or I just love watching the work that they're doing and following along. So I find myself navigating more towards those and podcasts that are done about other architects, or not. I think we've all heard of We Can Do Hard Things. I do enjoy that podcast as well, by Glennon Doyle. So yes, I do tap into these female-led initiatives.
Yeah, that's great. That's even better. Thank you so much for sharing.
I'm sorry, and I forgot your next question.
That's okay. It's what advice would you give to young architects or people that are watching?
Oh my gosh. Advice. There is a lot you can do with the education that you will receive in architecture. And I know everyone says that, and it's hard to understand what that means until you start working and seeing all the people that go into an architectural project, from finance to lawyers to contractors to laborers, the lighting manufacturers, the lighting designers, the furniture selections. I mean, there is so much that goes into a project that the education of an architect can easily adapt and plug into if that's of interest to them, or a specialization that they want to pursue. So I think there's a there's a lot of importance in pursuing a traditional architecture role or position when you graduate. That experience is really, really necessary just to learn about how it all works and how it all comes together and actually just how to draw something that will have to be built. So I wouldn't skip, don't feel like you have to skip that process or skip those few years, and that you have to start right away in what you think you're more passionate about. You know, like I was saying earlier, if I had, I think, started right in government upon graduating, I don't think I would have been able to do the job that I do. I needed that experience. I needed that foundational understanding of an architectural project before being able to do actually what I enjoy so much more in front end planning. But I needed that stepping stone. So my advice is those first few years after school, just dive in. Just dive in and soak it in like a sponge. Be a sponge. That is my advice. Be a sponge. Even if it's a topic you don't think is interesting, you're not really um, into whatever it is that they're talking about. You think this project that you're working on is boring. I promise you, if you just soak it in and take it as a learning experience, it will somehow come back to haunt you later on.
Yeah, it sounds like a trust the process kind of thing
Yes.
that you'll trust that you'll end up where you want to be and that the opportunities will come if you do what you care about.
You don't have to figure it all out in your 20s.
Yeah. Awesome. So where can our listeners and readers and watchers follow you and your projects?
Sure. I definitely post more about the work that we do at DDC and with the Civic Leadership Program on my LinkedIn. So you can absolutely find me there. And then I have my own personal Instagram account, but I don't, sometimes I post personal things like I enjoy showing when I'm out at a site visit. Um, Not so much just to show, oh, look at, I'm on the rooftop of this building in New York City and we have an amazing view, but also to show my friends and family, like, hey, this is what I do, because everyone's like, oh, what do you do as an architect? I don't really understand what your day to day looks like. So sometimes I just enjoy sharing that to dismantle the misinformation about what an architect does by pop culture. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to close up here, what is your hottest take on architecture? I think we've had a couple hot takes during
Hot
this
take.
chat, but I love it.
Um, but what does that mean, a hot take?
It's kind of like maybe something that's like an unpopular opinion or something that you think might cause some waves, but something you really believe like wholeheartedly.
Sure. I think everyone has their own idea of how much time they need to dedicate to something, and that is not a one-to-one of the person next to you. And what I mean by that is when I was in studio, I actually only pulled one all-nighter, and I did it more for fun, the final night before our final review our senior year. I just couldn't do it before that. I would leave the studio at 2, 3 in the morning, but I would still get like a few hours of sleep. I just could not push my body to pull an all-nighter. I don't know. Maybe it was perceived as weak. I definitely felt that way. I definitely felt like, oh, she's the weakling that's leaving. But looking back on it now, you know, I still made sure that I got up really early on Saturdays and was in studio really early on the weekends to get my projects done at a pace that was best for me. So I guess my hot take is that, there's this perception that the more time you spend the better it is. And I can't say that I believe that wholeheartedly. I think it's the more quality time that's spent, the better the project. But the time in which people work is unique to them. Some people are morning people, some people are night people, and you got to let them work at the hours that work best for them. So that's my hot take. You don't have to pull an
I
all-nighter to
love
be a
that.
great architect.
I love that. And I think that's really a discussion that we've been having a lot in the AIS as of recently is kind of discussions of working conditions and healthy practices and making sure that students and people in this profession are taking care of themselves and working in a way that's best for them. So I really appreciate that take. I liked it a lot. Well, thank you so much, Jenna, for joining us. I really appreciate all of your insights and for you taking the time. And I know that our watchers and listeners are going to love this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. And I'm so happy that you do this podcast series. I think when I was in AIS, we felt so disconnected from the AIA. So whatever efforts can be done to bridge those two together, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to everybody for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.